anticipation for the end of the series, here's my magnum opus and the longest video I'll probably ever make. I'm here to talk to you about why I personally love the series and why I think Haikyu was/is the most well-written sports manga of all time. I think a lot of people can agree to this. A lot of people don't, but I can't hear you and I'm not listening. So yeah, this is definitely a heavy bias. Here's my collection of the manga, Nendroids, and then I have this stupid panel tattooed on my body. And it's not even an action panel, but something silly. The series itself has amassed a huge following with over 55 million copies in circulation, inspiring people to start playing volleyball, a literal manifestation of one of the characters' induction on a real international team, several stage plays which have run with multiple different cast members, and of course the anime, which will conclude with 2 movies, which I'm conflicted about because I worry they won't be adapting all of it. Also, this is going to be covering the entire series, so very heavy spoilers for the end of it that's not covered in the anime. So if you haven't read it, pause the video, go read the last 100 chapters, and come back. You've been warned. If you get spoiled, it's now your fault. I'd like to also add that this is more so a video for people who have finished the series and want to relive it with me. I'm also going to break this into chapters, both for me and for you if you want to skip around. So, what is Haikyu? I'm sure you know of what it is or you wouldn't have clicked on this video, but if you don't, I'll give you a quick rundown. Haikyu is a sports-centered series starring Hinata Shoyo. A young Hinata was riding his bike one day when he passed by a TV that was broadcasting the Spring High National Volleyball Tournament, and he was immediately in awe of a player who was short in stature like himself, given the moniker the Little Giant, and decided to give the sport a try himself. Unfortunately, Hinata did not go to a middle school with a volleyball club, so he takes matters into his own hands. He forms his own club and volunteers his friends in different clubs to occasionally help him practice. Although it's not enough, and by the 3rd and final year of middle school, he's barely managed to scrape together a team to enter the local qualifiers. They're just this ragtag group of people from different sports, and they suffer a huge loss at their first game against Kyoto Daichi, which is a middle school known for its volleyball. That's when he first meets Kageyama Tobio, or the king of the court. And although their loss is great, Hinata does get in 1 point, and he never stops trying the entire game. It's a really crushing loss, but it motivates him even further and pushes him to join the school where the Little Giant attended all those years ago, Karasuno High School. And in a twist of fate, Kageyama also decided to go to that school. So instead of being able to crush him like he promised, the two form a rivalry that is pushed throughout the series. And though Karasuno was once a powerhouse school, its ranking has fallen a lot, and they're often labeled as the Flightless Crows. That's the basics of the first episode or so. Now we're going to dive into somewhat of a deep character analysis. I'm going to talk about the characters and some of their individual arcs in the story, and what I think they represent, and some analysis from my own perspective. It's not necessarily right or wrong, but what I've taken from it as a whole. Again, I want to emphasize that this is a heavy spoiler zone. If you've not read past season 4 of the anime, then you will be spoiled. I'm not going to start out with our golden sunshine boy, but I am going to start with someone who you may not think of right off the bat, and that's Takeda sensei. Takeda is the #1 fan of Karasuno. Kumeta! Kumeta yo! 練習試合 相手は県のベスト4青葉城西高校 And though he's green as an advisor, he still wants the best for these boys. He's the reason the team can even progress forward in the first place. At first, he may seem like a bumbling, apologetic man who's inexperienced and silly, but he single-handedly managed to get the team a new coach and pull in practice matches that they'd otherwise not get due to their reputation. Takeda revives the team in a way that lets them just play and practice. He's a pillar to them, and he supports them even pulling money from his own bank account to get them where they needed to go. On a surface level, you might not see these things at first, but once you get to the end, it'll hit you. Those two quotes come from the final game in the Nationals arc that Karasuno participates in Hinata's first year of school. After suffering from a fever, Hinata is forced to quit the game, and these words stick with him for the rest of his life. To break it down even further, Takeda is telling everyone, that this is just one loss. This is just one heartache, and we can learn from it and grow. What matters now is what you choose to do with the things that you've learned. He knew from the start all these people had great potential, and as their faculty advisor, as their coach, he wanted them to shine. Years later, he's still coaching with Ukai, and he's sobbing and so proud to see how far they've come. He's truly what a good teacher should be, someone who encourages their kids but doesn't skirt around the truth and is honest with them. He definitely scolds Hinata during the ball boy arc, and we all cringed, but he also asks him what he learned from it. The team without Ukai also wouldn't be the team. They needed a proper coach to keep progressing. The third years weren't able to do what a coach could do. Also, I'd like to point out that he's only 26, so he's not as old as everyone thinks he is. He's still a young person trying to figure it out, and that's why we find him at his family convenience store at the beginning. At first, he's completely adverse to the idea of coaching some brats who loiter around his store. Especially in the sport he quit. He doesn't have bad memories of the sport. The opposite, really. He actually had a lot of youthful memories from the sport, and it brought him a lot of joy. But that's why he wants to leave it in the past. Takeda plays a huge part in getting him back, but the team itself showed him excitement, and he was truly happy to restart as their coach. Ukai brings the experience that Takeda lacked. One of my favorite moments was during the Inarizaki match.
Oi, Kinoshita Hisashi 16歳。今の稲荷崎のレシーバーは銀島仁17歳、宮治16歳、赤木道成18歳だ。以上。
He grounds the kids and reminds them that they're just playing against people and not some crazy superhero characters. He's determined to beat all these other old coaches who look down on him as a young guy and who are expecting him to fail because of the big shoes he has to fill because of his grandpa. His hair is also something significant. He dyed it blonde to rebel, in my opinion. He didn't want to be stuck in the same place, so he made the choice to be different. We see him with dark hair in the Adlers versus Black Jackals match with all his students. My interpretation, which might not be all correct, was that he finally found his place with Karasuno and didn't feel the need to lash out anymore. As much as he helped his students grow, they also helped him grow. We can't talk about Coach Ukai without talking about his grandfather.
大きいものが強いのは明確。個を極めるのも強さ。新しい戦い方を探すのも強さ。
Ukai Sr. is a very brutal coach, but he's a kind man at heart and wants what's best for his students. Ukai Sr. does a lot to propel Hinata's growth forward and helps him start to unlock his potential by introducing to him concepts like the different tempos needed to accurately receive and spike the ball. But don't ask me to go into further details into Mina's tempo and stuff. I don't really get it still, but I think it's cool. He's also the reason for the rivalry with Nekoma. Both he and Coach Nekomata have had the rivalry since they were children, which led up to the present day. That is until he had to be hospitalized and retire. The rivalry truly shaped the story because it put so much weight into the eventual rematch / first game of Nekoma and Karasuno. The Battle of the Garbage Dump wouldn't have even existed without Ukai Sr. He may be retired, but he still deeply cares for Karasuno, seen by when he attends all of their games that he can. The last time we see him, he's with Nekomata, and they're both sharing a meal while watching the Olympics, aka his former students taking on the world. Our dead captain. Just kidding. He didn't actually die. This was a meme that circulated for a while because of Tanaka knocking him out during a game. Anyway, Daichi is one of the 3 third years who holds the team together like glue, like many other characters mentioned. Without him, the team wavers. Daichi was an unknown in middle school. He worked his way up to captain after displaying an incredible sense of leadership and being someone who could motivate others to keep moving. He's tough on his team, but he's kind. He knows how to discipline them, but he's not always too serious.
いい加減にしろよ。違う、お前が落ち着け。菅、お前は多少のリアクションしろよ。
He had a big task of stepping into the role of coach when Ukai Sr. was hospitalized, so he was balancing that and being the team captain. Daichi is a really strong foundation for which Karasuno was built on. He's honed his receiving ability to be something incredible because as long as the volleyball is in the air, it's okay. And that's what Daichi does for the team. The members rely on each of these receives, and when he was momentarily taken out, it was scary. And despite his reliable personality, he does have a lot of fear within him. He does feel like it could be his fault if they lose. He wants to maintain the dignity that he has as a captain and doesn't want his kohai to see him crumble. The win against Shiratorizawa was such an incredible moment to see the 3 of them come together and cry and scream for joy. It also made me cry and scream for joy. Years of loss that culminate into a major win, especially against such a powerhouse team, was done through Daichi's exceptional leadership. He truly represents reliability.
俺にはド派手なプレーは無理だけど、土台なら作ってやれる。落ち着け！自滅してる余裕ねえぞ！何にビビってやがる！テレビか？浮かれてんじゃねえ！
Our resident chaotic king. Though Kageyama took his place in the starting lineup, Sugawara is another important foundation for the team. He's the support and reassurance for the team if something bad were to happen to Kageyama. In fact, his experience is what makes everyone feel better as well. He's a kind person with a crazy side who's full of antics that make Daichi's job often harder than it needs to be. But he's a steadfast and reliable person, and that's what makes him wonderful. Suga could have easily been an adversary for Kageyama, but instead of that, he chose to bow out gracefully because he knew that Kageyama would help the team move forward. And at the end of the day, their goal was nationals and to play as long as possible. He knew his limits and knew Kageyama was growing and had the potential to be what he is today. His profession as an elementary school teacher reflects that too. Suga is one to nurture and care for his juniors while also pushing them further. He did that with Hinata when he helped him with receiving practice, and he did that with Kageyama by simply being a rival for the setter position. And he isn't called Mr. Refreshing by Oikawa for nothing.
Hey! 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 Hey!
When he comes out on the court, there's a sense of positivity that he brings with him.
俺の武器は堅実さ。でも、俺にも新しいことができる。
Asahi is lovable and strong, but also timid. He's one of the only third years who did quit at one point due to the feeling of loss. He has a glass heart, since he seemingly takes everything said about him personally, his looks and gangster-like features, but he's an all-around softie who is the ever-so reliable ace of the team. Asahi showcases a realistic sense of dread that many people feel like when failing. Sometimes you quit something that you love because it doesn't bring you joy anymore, and that's okay. In his case, he was brought back when he found a way to fall in love with it again, but that doesn't always happen. His dynamic with Noya is important because Noya is someone who always looked up to him, and he believed in him for his strength. He doesn't look down at him for leaving, but he is disappointed. We're all scared of things in life, and we all freeze up at moments where they matter most. In his case, what mattered was picking up and moving forward after that. Regardless of the loss he felt like he caused in the previous year, the growth he had and his ability to move past it is what makes him strong. Hinata is also someone who motivates him to get better too. He calls Hinata a rival due to their want of the ace position.
でも俺は
負けるつもりはないよ。
He declares that he's not going to lose to him, which is indicative of the fire that was stirred in him after seeing Hinata play. Also, his career as a fashion designer slash stylist, to me, is him embracing who he is finally as a person and using his rugged looks to charm people. Did you know that Asahi designed uniforms for the special game? Quitting something does not mean you're weak. It's just about how you proceed afterwards. This is definitely evident in the Kamo Madai game where Asahi gets in his head again. But he says this: "To save some time, I'm sorry, but I'm going to condense these three into one category, but I will try to expand it. Narita, Kinoshita, and Ennoshita mean a lot to the team, even if they did warm the bench for most of the season. And it's because they're present that the team can play without being afraid of making mistakes. Having someone on the bench who's still trained as hard as they did is reassuring, so that if one does need to be switched out, they're there to have your back. And this isn't to say that these three don't shine at some points. Sorry, Narita, not so much. But Kinoshita gets his time, and Ennoshita even becomes the captain after Daichi graduates. Karasuno is a small team compared to most of the others aside from Nekoma. And though 12 players isn't a lot, a team of 6 with 6 extra people they can heavily rely on is something. A comparison I can think of is in K and B. There's some bench warmers too, but they can't match the pacing of the Generation of Miracles no matter what. But these second years have been working just as hard like Noya or Tanaka. Plus K and B isn't really grounded in reality like Haikyu is in many ways. To have someone behind you in a time of need is enough. And I appreciate these three for what they are, even if they do get left behind by the fandom. Though of course there's like hundreds of characters in Haikyu, so remembering every single person isn't always possible. But in this case, those we forget often still make an impact in the world. It's good to remember that everyone is living their lives just how they're supposed to be, whether it's in the spotlight or not. Ennoshita becomes a physical therapist after graduation, Kinoshita works for a train company, and Narita works for a realty firm. Nothing too glam, but I'd say it suits them all. Your average guy. Bit of a hot temper, but because of that, he has one of the best hearts out there.
そっちこそ、うちの一年に何の用ですか?
He's passionate about the sport he wants to play. He knows he's not the best. He knows he's not on the same level as someone like Kageyama. And he knows he doesn't have the hops like Hinata, but he's there. He's as much of a foundation as Daichi, and he works really hard. It takes him a while to learn something new, and that's probably one of the most reliable traits he has as your average person. Tanaka knows his limits and chooses to surpass them. He chooses to try and move forward. He can be brought down easily too, which is shown in the match against Inarizaki.
普段そんなこと考えない。でも半年に1回ぐらい。限りなくメンタルがマイナス寄りになった時に思う。自分は平凡なんだと。
But when he was able to calm down and take it one step at a time, he moved mountains. He's a comedic relief character in many ways, but there's so much more to say about him. He treats people with care, especially his wife. But even with his first crush, he lets her down in a very gentle way. I'd say a good majority of people are like him. We're not all outstanding geniuses who can pick up a skill in a few tries and it's fine. We all have a pace that works for us, and Tanaka proves it. Trying to win or succeed at anything can be completely overwhelming, and it's just a matter of how you handle what gets thrown at you. He acknowledges the fact that he can help others improve, like when he started helping Hinata and Kageyama practice early in the morning. Both a benefit for them and for him. Plus, he and Noya have an extremely fun relationship and they play off of each other really well. His career as a personal trainer / sports store owner gives us an insight of what he's like even more. A good personal trainer wants their client to be their best selves and feel good about themselves. He absolutely embodies this role well. Nishinoya Yu is the most free-spirited person in the story. He chose the path no one expected him to take after graduating high school. Who knew Noya would be traveling around the world with a volleyball in tow? Of course, Furudate did give him an alternate AU where he went pro, but it's so interesting to see this development. I got ahead of myself, but Noya is an incredibly strong, well-rounded player who's limited to receiving. The libero of the team, the guardian deity, is a wild card that no one can predict. Noya and Asahi's absences during the initial practice match with Alba Josai makes it clear that they lend a great deal of strength to the team. Noya is truly a lifeline. He's dipping in and out, receiving all kinds of wicked serves and spikes from the opposing side. We rely on his presence, and when he's switched off the court, there's an anxious feeling of whether or not Karasuno can receive the ball or not. But he's also a good balance of silly and serious. He's loyal and driven, and when Asahi left, he tried his best to get him to come back, and was suspended after the third attempt where he broke a vase in front of the vice principal. Noya also loves Hinata a lot and sees the potential in him, and helps him work on his receiving, even though Hinata did annoy him at first about his height. But he did compliment him later, so it made up for it. Short in stature, but mighty. Back to him choosing not to pursue a pro volleyball career. This choice to me was incredibly interesting because volleyball was something that he was good at, something he would have succeeded at, but ultimately wasn't what made him truly happy. He's at peace in Italy, fishing for marlins, or traveling with Asahi in Egypt. From this choice, I can only infer that you don't have to pursue something just because you're good at it. Others' expectations shouldn't weigh you down on choosing what you want to do with your life. He's truly living how he wants, and like I said before, he brings a volleyball with him wherever, meaning he didn't totally disconnect from it. We all have different paths, and sometimes we go a direction that's different from what's expected. Kiyoko is a soft-spoken and kind-hearted person, who of course is your token lady manager. But she's so much more than that. I mean, come on, she ran like God knows how far to get Hinata's shoes from that little boy, and made it back in time for them to play the game. But aside from that, she's a third year. She's been with the team and has seen it grow and change. She's been there on the sidelines watching the wins, watching the losses, and watching people come and go. And she's committed herself to staying with these boys. She had to retire from her own sport after an injury, so she put all she could into the role of managing the team. When she finally gets Yachi, it's incredible because I think a part of her was worried there would be no one to step up to fill her shoes. And more on this in Yachi's section, but the managers keep coming, not to fear. Kiyoko is like a bright light for these boys.
神様にお願いしても試合に勝たせてもらえるわけじゃない。
And she even pulled Tanaka out of his rebellious stage.
いいえ。
His persistence at volleyball is what drew her in, and I've seen some discourse about their relationship, but ultimately she did choose him because of his strength.
人の感情はやたら察するし、清水先輩が本気でやめてって言ったらやめる気がする。
She sees that he's a kind and strong person. Plus, it doesn't hurt to have her beauty distract the other team so they can score, right? I don't think that happens, but it probably wouldn't not have happened. I mean, look at her. She gives the team reassurance and does all she can to make the games run smoothly and take care of them.
私はコートに立たないし、ユニフォームを着るわけでもない。でも今、挑まずにはいられない。
Yachi represents Town Person B. There's a reason why she seems like she doesn't have a purpose in the grand scheme of things, but in reality she does. Townsperson B may not seem like a significant character in a play, but without extras, without background actors, what do we have but an empty stage? Yachi is incredibly resourceful and resilient, despite her fear of disappointing her successful powerhouse of a mother. Yachi is a big part of the reason the team was able to fund its way to nationals, with her phenomenal graphic design and marketing eye. And since she didn't have experience with volleyball, she was able to capture an objective moment to display for the team. She often underestimates her own importance. On top of that, she helped Hinata and Kageyama study and actually participate in the training camps and games. She's just as much of a support as Kiyoko, and she brings new ideas and thoughts to the table. This particular image with her two junior managers is so exciting because she moved mountains during her time in school. She was able to overcome a lot of her fear and anxiety because she realized that she did have a place in the team. She wasn't just some extra. Though it's not bad to be town person B. The first time she's on the court alone with the boys, it's very scary. But she knows what she needs to do, and she knows that this will be what she has to do anyway. Plus, she does a great job of taking care of Hinata during his fever. That support she gives him means a lot, and it shows how far she's come and how comfortable she is with what she needs to do. And just being allowed to breathe a little lets her come into her own. After college, she works at an advertising company, which is her strong suit, and she was able to even design the posters and the campaigns for the special match. I think we all underestimate what we're capable of doing, and it's good to try new things even if it's a little scary. That's what Yachi is all about. Yamaguchi is our first year who eventually becomes the team captain in his third year because he's the glue that holds the other three together and stops them from killing each other. Hinata and Kageyama are hot-headed volleyball idiots, and Tsukkishima is a selfish bastard type. I say this with love, but Yamaguchi is the most sane out of all of them. He's a shy person by nature and is often overcome by his nervousness. He's usually pulled into games as a pinch server with his killer jump floater, one that he had to work really hard at. We see him try and fail to land that serve, and all of his hard work and practice is shown off during the rematch against Aoba Jose.
Yamaguchi! 10点取れ! それ試合終わるけど
He manages to get a boatload of points for the team, proving that hard work and effort can go a long way. He also does struggle with the fact that he's the only first year who's on the bench. The other three are regulars, but he's not often called in. But that's what pulls him forward. He wants to be someone the team can rely on like the others. He goes out of his way to privately train with Shimada to hone his skills, and the hard work does pay off when he's eventually made captain. A steadfast foundation to support the three wild cards, which are Hinata, Kageyama, and Tsukishima respectively. I've been saying this a lot, but not everyone shines as bright as the others, and that doesn't mean they're less of a person. Yamaguchi may not shine as brightly as the freak duo, and he may not be as tall as intimidating as Tsukishima, but his heart and mind are in the right place.
次は 10点取るから
He's quick to analyze what went wrong and doesn't let his failure stop him from moving forward. All in all, he's incredibly loyal to his friends, especially Tsukishima, and wants the best for them and those he cares about.
そんなもんプライド以外に何がいるんだ
If you're like me and started watching this in 2014 when it first aired, you probably didn't like Tsukishima at first.
小さいのと田中さんどっち先に抑えましょうか
I sure didn't, but then I was quickly eating my words.
一人時間さうちの野生児は騙せても僕には通じないんでよろしくどうぞ
He's one of the characters whose pasts we see more in depth. He plays volleyball because he feels like he has to, but of course he loves it deep down, though he wouldn't admit it now. He went through a big betrayal from his brother. He loved the sport with all his heart, and finding out his brother lied to him about playing on the team broke his trust in him and the sport altogether. Despite his haughty personality, he actually does have low self-esteem and doesn't see himself as good enough. Another reason he bags on Hinata so much is because he does feel inferior to him. Hinata's outlook on volleyball and life is overwhelmingly positive despite his disadvantages both in height and skill. He even asks Asahi if he feels the pressure of an immense talent creeping up behind him, which indicates even further how he sees himself. He's afraid to fall behind and afraid to be crushed by his own expectations. Tsukishima is more grounded to reality than anyone because he only sees volleyball as a club at first. But his time with the third gym squad moves him forward from that mindset. Bokuto and Kudo school him in more ways than one, but ultimately teach him that he's got a lot to learn.
楽しい
いや特には
それはさ下手くそだからじゃない
both by riling him up and telling him the truth, why they play, and that there's a moment that just clicks and you know it when you know it. His block against Ushijima is what that moment was. It was an incredibly powerful moment that definitely had me holding my breath. He set out to do one thing in that game, and it was to block him. This was probably the start of his real love for the sport, though he'd never admit that to his peers, and why he kept going.
Orega! お前がバレエにハマる瞬間だ。
In the garbage battle game, he's in it to win it, because he's finally up against Kuro, who's been his teacher and rival until this point. After their win, we see them shake hands, and it truly reflects how much he's grown in that short period of time. We also can't forget that Tsukkishima is both a nerd and a jock at the same time. Not only does he play on a Division II volleyball team, the Sendai Frogs, but he also works for a museum. Out of all the characters who continues to play volleyball after high school, you'd never guess that about the negative boy from the beginning of the series. This was an incredible revelation to me because it means that he truly does love the sport, so much that he's casually playing on a high-level team while also keeping a day job. He's an incredibly complex character who does a lot, and even though he does grow to love the sport, he still is legally required to make fun of the freak duo.
そんなに騒がないでくださいよ。たかが1点。勝負はここからです。
Did you think I forgot about her? Yeah, she may not go to school anymore, but that doesn't stop this queen from supporting her little brother in the team. This woman is the reason they were able to fight back in the Inarizaki match so well. In fact, she has kept them afloat many times with both driving Hinata and Kageyama to training camp and rallying the troops to support Karasuno during games. She's one of the biggest cheerleaders and supports, and really shows off the fact that having one person rooting for you can really mean a whole lot.
田中さんのお姉さんですか。
サエコ姉さんと呼びな。東京までなんてあっという間に届けてやるよ。
サエコ姉さん。
And of course, our resident liar. Just kidding. He is a good brother at his core despite what he lied about. He lied because he wanted to protect his brother, so it was a good intention but bad execution. Plus, he's also a #1 supporter of Karasuno and of course his little brother Kei. Although he's not present in a lot of the story, he's important because he shows what the pressures of society and general expectations placed upon someone can do. It's an extreme situation, but he found himself in a lie that spiraled out of control. Luckily, he and Kei do eventually make up.
俺の仲間はほっといても勝つ。そんくらい信じとけばいいんだ。
But he doesn't like letting people down, and that's very relatable. That's why he went that far, and why it was so crushing for both him and Tsukkishima when the truth came out. Plus, he's kind of in that section of gifted kids who realized that they didn't feel gifted at all when they got to the bigger pond. He was known to be an ace, but cracked under the pressure, which happens to many of us. And that pressure did push him away from volleyball. Luckily, he found a new passion and is supporting his brother, but it's important to realize your shortcomings, even if you do have to be broken for that to happen. From this point on, I'm only going to touch on a few characters in each school that I find significant personally and to the plot. He's Hinata's silent best friend. He's a man of few words, but he's actually a very caring and considerate person. But man, is this team hard for Karasuno at first. Definitely a huge wall that they had to climb over, both literally and metaphorically, before they could move forward. He doesn't say much out loud, but you can definitely tell what he's thinking. On the court, he's a powerhouse, but he's generally calm and composed in difficult situations, and a big part of the Iron Wall reputation that the school has garnered.
Chess! Chess!
I wanted to add him because I wanted to note the friendship that isn't always included in other sports anime. Maybe it is, but I'm just gonna leave this in just because this is about Haikyu. These people, despite being enemies on the court, are still people to each other on the outside.
Hinata 少よ、次は必ずお前を止める。
Aside from maybe like Oikawa, but you know. Aone is probably one of the first outsiders we see that respects Hinata for who he is pretty quickly too. And their rivals, of course. That starts a wave of others, but it is nice to see that Hinata can make even his enemies smile. And a quick shout out to Futakuchi, who is, for the most part, Aone's translator and the eventual captain. I also really want to emphasize that both Aone and Futakuchi do go pro afterwards. Moving on, I want to talk about Karasuno's ultimate rivalry, which is Nekoma. They're a team that helped bring them up as well as gave me the most anxiety during their game with them. As an aside, I think while reading it, I literally had to look up the score so I could keep reading because I was on the verge of a mental breakdown. If you know about the campfire, you know the pain. Starting with the coach himself, Coach Nekomata. He actually helped Karasuno a lot by allowing them to participate in their training camp. Due to his long history with Ukai Sr. and our current coach Ukai, it became the perfect opportunity for him to help his players grow as well as reignite the long dormant rivalry. His coaching style is all about consistency and foundational elements of the game. Nekoma is a really well-rounded team, but they do specialize and perfectly counter on defense against Karasuno's plethora of offensive weapons. He's also more of a laid-back and calmer coach, choosing to allow his players to work through things themselves while also guiding them if needed.
相手の根気と忍耐の策を破るにはこちらも同じだけの粘りがいるだろうな。
In fact, when Kudo and Kenma were children, they met Coach Nekomata and were inspired to play the game even more. Probably not as much Kenma, but you know. Plus, he's part of the Pretty Setters Club too, which Furudate made sure to emphasize. Nekomata was also a really good player when he was young. His coaching style does contrast with Ukai Sr.'s brute force style. Nekomata is someone who uses observation and strategy in play, and it does a really good job. The training camp helped them get an idea of what Karasuno's playstyle was like. The campfire moment in the Nekoma vs Karasuno game, again, was the most stressful thing I have ever read. He may look like a sweet old man, but he's actually a master manipulator.
ボールを繋いでいる限りは負けないんだ。
Quick mention to Inooka, who was Hinata's first rival in Nekoma. They're also seen to have a strong friendship, and they both look up to each other in many ways. Once Lev joined the team, Inooka was put to the back burner, but we do see him make a comeback in the dumpster battle, and he really makes a difference. Nekomata had him shift from middle blocker to wing spiker, which is also a parallel to Hinata, who does that too when he joins the Jackals. I lied earlier when I said Aone was the first one to respect Hinata. Inooka didn't underestimate him because he recognized Hinata's abilities right away. He's also a really strong blocker, and he definitely adds to the incredibly tough defense Nekoma bolsters.
自分もレギュラー取れるようにもっと頑張るっす。
Lev and Hinata are very similar and also polar opposites.
なあ、身長何センチ？俺、日向翔陽、1年。
この前194になってた。俺、ハイバリエーフ1年。
Obviously, Lev being a whopping 6'5" has a huge advantage in the game over Hinata, but he's also just kind of bad at volleyball. He started pretty recently when the story began, so he's mainly working with luck and instinct. But it kind of shows you how much height can bring you in this game. I wanted to mention him partially because look at his time skip model form, but also because he's a very good example of a realistic character, because Furudate is amazing at writing. Lev started in high school, and he hasn't been playing all his life, but he started because of his height, and because it was interesting. People often look down on Hinata because he's short, but when they see him jump and score, they get it. But Lev, on the other hand, is just naturally expected to be good, and then of course you see him miss, and it's funny in the moment, but digging really deep, it just goes to show you that you can't underestimate someone because they lack a physical feature. Or even overestimate them because they're tall. You know the old joke about the weather and tall people.
一番たくさん点をもぎ取ったやつがエースだろう。単純。
Yaku, the rival libero and the menace to Karasuno in every way possible. He's the perfect rival for Noya, which is so funny because Noya learns a lot from him too.
3番さんのレシーブすごかったっす。うちのエースのスパイク、あんなにちゃんと拾える人初めて見ました。あんだけ全員のレシーブのレベル高いチームでリベロの座にいる実力。
They actually learn a lot from each other, honestly. Yaku is also quick to anger, especially at the first years, namely Lev, who's usually acting out. Also, yes, Yaku does have some insecurity about his height, but as you can see in the time skip, I don't think it's bothered him much since then. He and Kudo have a frenemy dynamic and have been constantly bickering with each other since they joined the team.
魚っておっさんかよ。
どこさヘキサエン酸が足りてない発言はやめていただきたいね。
But it doesn't mean that they don't work incredibly well together. And also, look at this. They're still best friends. According to Bokuto, Yaku is one of the only players capable of stopping a spiker from landing their hit without ever touching the ball. He's also known as the Demon Senpai for his juniors, and he's definitely a huge reason why Nekoma's team play works so well. He also has a very analytical mind, as does Kudo, meaning it works perfectly well for the strategy that Nekoma implements when playing against any team. Timeskip Yaku and his glow up are my favorite. I mean, look at him, this is ridiculous. He's a great character who's a great antagonist for Karasuno.
後輩の成長に思いを馳せてる場合じゃねえんだよ。
Also, quick shout out to Kai for putting up with both Kudo and Yaku for all 3 years of high school.
それじゃあ1年一人ずつ目標を。全国制覇っす。右に同じです。
I'm gonna preface this section by saying that Kudo is one of my favorite characters in the entire series, and I think it's pretty obvious why. If not, I don't know, look at him. Plus he's voiced by Nakamura Yuichi, so...
そんなせこいことしません。ちゃんとグッてやって測ってます。
But in terms of character, Kudo is a great opposition to Daichi in terms of leadership. They're cut from the same cloth, to be honest, and they both have to deal with a bunch of rowdy club members.
その時は覚悟しとけよカラスな。
山本うるせえ。
Kudo with his dynamic with Kenma is very sweet because Kudo is an inspiration to those who know him. He has the ability to keep people inspired with his signature phrase.
俺たちは血液だ。滞りなく流れろ。酸素を回せ。脳が正常に働くために。行くぞ！
Despite his serious looks, he actually has a pretty silly side to him too, and that's definitely amplified when it comes to being around Bokuto. He knows how to rile people up, which can both benefit him and hurt him, especially when it comes to someone like Tsukkishima who took what Kudo taught him and turned it against him. And his playstyle and observational skills are lethal for opponents as he's able to quickly identify an issue his teammates might be having and find a solution to it.
たまには目立たせていただきます。まだ一本ぽっちだ。
That's why the game between Karasuno and Nekoma is so frustrating because Kudo is at the helm of the ship. He can track down weaknesses and he's not afraid to exploit them. Aside from that, he's just a steadfast person who cares about his teammates. And of course, volleyball. When he moved to the city when he was a kid, he had to leave his previous volleyball club until he met Kenma, who dragged him along, and eventually met younger coach Nekomata. That eventually gave him confidence and led him to who he is today. Amazingly enough, after months and months of the post-high school arc, many of the audience members, including me, were still wondering where Kudo had been all this time. And we find out after the end of the Adlers vs. Jackals game that he'd been there all along. He works for the Japanese Volleyball Association's promotions division, and his job is literally to recruit people into playing and getting people into the sport, because it's something that helped him in a dark time and he wants to share the love. And not only that, he's the reason for the special game bringing together all of our favorites for one amazing final round. Hopefully not final, but you know. As Atsumu says, he's quite the con man, but he just really wants people to know how wonderful volleyball truly is. His character is one of the messages of the story itself. Look how cool this sport is. It can be heartbreaking and exhilarating all at once. Just try it out. And I am also definitely absolutely biased, but all in all, he's a really great character. Also, this fact about him and his hair.
俺たちは血液だ。滞りなく流れろ。酸素を回せ。脳が正常に働くために。
Kenma is an absolute fan favorite, and I agree. Kozuken would be one of the best influencers in this world if we could only merge Haikyu into ours. And on top of that, he's Hinata's sugar daddy. I mean sponsor. But he's like the equivalent of Mr. Beast with how he throws his money at Hinata. This quiet and reserved on the outside, but fiery on the inside person is a wonderfully complex lazy jock. Kenma would rather be doing anything but moving.
パスさすが猫又ぜ
座りたい。
He loves video games and loves to sit inside, but deep down we all know he loves the sport just as much as his peers.
みんな頑張ってレシーブを上げてるから俺もちゃんとしないとみたいな。
だから それが根性だって
いうか頑張ることに明確な名前つけないとダメなの。俺が頑張ったら変。
Kenma basically brought volleyball back into Kudo's life when they were children, and then he was forced along. However, as I say that, though Kenma seems like he doesn't want to be there, he truly does love it. He hates losing, and that's what pushes him forward. The reason he dyed his hair is kind of ironic too. He wanted to not stand out, but in turn it probably just made him stand out more. The reason he keeps it long is because he doesn't like having a big field of vision. He's also a great friend to Hinata. Their initial encounter sparked a true friendship between them. Kenma went out of his way to comfort Hinata after he got sick during the Kamo Madai match. He even brought him an iPad so Hinata could watch the game. I would say that Kenma is comparable to a character like Mob. If you push him far enough, he'll explode, which is seen several times throughout the series.
根性うるさい。アバウトだよ。体力が1残るわけでもあるまいし。
わけわかんないこと言うな。
He's passionate, though he never admitted outright. The loss against Karasuno was hard, but he was happy that it was a loss against them. And he even went as far as thanking Kudo for introducing him to volleyball. He even tells Hinata and Kageyama that they'll meet again at Nationals next year. Kenma, like many of us, went through something that he wasn't sure why he was doing it. He kept it up, and he was even probably the captain in his third year, but eventually he decided it wasn't for him. Regardless of that, it still has a place in his life. Plus, he's rich and famous enough. He could play again if he wanted to anytime, and get some of the best star athletes to play with.
力なんでこの世にあんの。重力ムカつく。重力がなければボールは落ちてこないし。
Our resident pretty boy, Akashi, is a weirdo. Akashi is one of my favorite characters too because of how he wrangles in Bokuto.
僕とさんの弱点その37。片一方の調子が著しくいい場合。
俺いつもクロスってどう打ってたっけ。
もう一方、忘れる場合がある。
His sharp mind allows him to analyze the situation in a few milliseconds and act accordingly. He's one of the few non-Inarizaki characters who doesn't wear knee pads, which means he has a lot of faith in his chest dives. He's calm, cool, and collected 90% of the time.
道は作りますので。
But when he isn't, he takes it pretty hard. He tends to let his anxiety get the best of him. During Fukurodani's match with Mujinazaka, he starts to get ahead of himself, and he tries to calm down only to make it worse. He eventually has to be pulled out, but realizes that he doesn't need to control everything, and he's able to overcome the situation. In the grand scheme of things, Akashi is someone who doesn't like when things go out of control. He likes being able to know what's going on and what's going to happen, which ironically, playing volleyball is definitely not something that can be like that. His present career as an editor for Shonen Jump is interesting too, because out of his control, he originally wanted to be in the literature department. But he supports Tenma, who is writing a volleyball manga. You know, Furudate's self-insert. But that career choice also reflects his need for control in life. He likes to be in charge, and he likes a project, aka Bokuto. Plus this moment
おや。
was literally started by him. He's incredibly relatable with how he reacts to certain situations, and his dynamic with Bokuto is kind of a mirror to Hinata and Kageyama, where they both heavily rely on each other to improve and grow. He's the one person who's able to keep up with Bokuto, and he's a great supporting character in the story. Bokuto is truly one of the most fun characters.
俺だったらそろそろイラついてネットとかアウトとかやっちゃうな。
自覚あるのか。
His mood swings when he tries to become tiny, even though he's 6'1" and as wide as a refrigerator, are hilarious. But not only that, he actually offers a lot of good advice for his juniors. Despite his cheery personality, Bokuto did have a rough time before he was in high school with volleyball. Not with skill, but with his over-enthusiastic personality for it. He's been playing since he was young, and he's incredibly gifted, but that meant many of his teammates avoided being with him, likely due to jealousy, not wanting to try as hard, things like that. He often found himself alone until he joined Fukurodani. He does tend to beat himself up a lot, and that's where the mood swings come from, and the 37 weaknesses.
今日はもう俺にあげんな。出た僕としょぼくれモード。なんだ
However, meeting Akashi helps pull him out of that funk a lot. And he does eventually grow beyond that, as reflected in the Adlers vs. Jackals game, where he no longer gets depressed after making a mistake. He somehow even managed to grow a little bit in height, even though he was 18 when the series first started. I can't forget that Bokuto is also recognized as one of the top 5 aces in the country, only barely missing the top 3, as pointed out by Kuro.
でもお前らんとこの牛若は3本の指に入ってくるやつだぜ。3本？おい、そんなこと言ったら俺がかすんじゃうじゃねえか。
He's also a great role model for Hinata. Look how cute they are. He teaches him a lot of things, like how to tool block, which then Hinata uses against him. It's a shame we never saw an official match between Fukudo Dani and Karasuno, but the one with Nekoma was just as interesting. Bokuto is also classified as a volleyball idiot. He just wants to play until he's old and dead, I guess. He's already gray.
もっとみんなとやりたかったな。僕とさ、死にませんよね。あ、俺は130歳まで生きる。
He's fun to watch, and he's incredibly strong. And I love how he accidentally did like 3 different chest bumps in the Jackals game. And this face is so iconic and so Bokuto. All around, he's a great character who's very inspirational and crucial to Hinata's growth.
Hey, hey, hey!
Moving on to the school that houses one of the greatest villains of all time. Just kidding. But there's a running joke of Oikawa being categorized with villains like Aizen from Bleach, and it's the funniest thing in the world. All of these mass murderers, and then you have a high school senior who plays volleyball. But before we talk about him, let's talk about Daichi. You're probably wondering why I'm talking about him, but he's a big part of the reason why Kageyama started out the way we saw him. I'm not saying that Daichi is a bad person for feeling annoyed with Kageyama's behavior in middle school, but I am going to point out that this relationship between him, Kageyama, and Kunimi was not great, and it was best that they separated.
Kageyama 元気か？
おう、テスト期間以外は
To backtrack a little, he and Kageyama clashed as players. Daichi is someone who tries to get along with his teammates as best as he can, and he tried to match up with him as much as he could, but he was overwhelmed and grew resentful towards Kageyama, whose skill set was growing rapidly. He and Kunimi are a big part of the reason Kageyama ended up getting benched too. Learning that Kageyama actually did learn how to work with others does fill him with guilt, but he also accepts the fact that he wasn't the one who could bring out Kageyama's true potential, and that doesn't happen without some convincing.
今みたいなのちゃんと打てなきゃ王様が怒り出すよ。
Daichi was very adamant that there was no way anyone could match up with Kageyama, but Hinata is the one who surprises him by telling him it's not bad to have a rivalry with a friend.
トスだけは最悪。
あ？トスが？
すげえ。
Even though he's a minor character and someone in the past, the way he's weaved into the story and then proven wrong in a lot of ways is important to me because it shows growth. Daichi went through a lot dealing with Kageyama and then was able to see him grow as a person.
喧嘩？
譲れなくて喧嘩すんの普通だ。
He eventually goes to college and now he plays in a Division II team, proving that he still loves the sport despite a lot of the issues that he had in middle school. After the Jackals vs. Adlers game, he and Kunimi both asked Kageyama if he'd ever play a casual game with him, and not to mention the beach volleyball excursion. I'd like to drive home the point again that Furudate puts a lot of thought into their writing. Even the more minor characters have a place and a role in the story. Every interaction we have can impact us in one way or another. The fact that they were able to grow past this speaks volumes to me. Everyone is capable of change.
仲直りなんかしねえ。別にもともと仲良くねえしな。そんで次は絶対に俺たちが勝つ。
We're gonna move to a quick Maki and Matsune interlude. I think Hanamaki is one of the most relatable characters in the whole series. I know I just wrote a bunch of essays on how everyone is realistic, but this man is 27, 30 in the year 2023 and doesn't know what's going on. And I think that's how we all are. Don't let the media trick you into thinking you're supposed to have your life together in your late 20s.
いいじゃんマッキー。キレッキレだね。
In the grand scheme of things, that's not that long, so don't feel bad if you've gone through some moments and you're literally lost. Also, Matsune is a funeral employee. People are dying to get in to see him.
お大事にどうぞ。
Moving on to our resident athletic trainer and one of the few people to go to America after graduation. Iwaizumi is a great character and fan favorite all around. He's strong and resilient, and he's the perfect counter to Karasuno, which is what makes this match and rematch so interesting. Iwaizumi is one of the only third years at Aoba Josai who's not over 6 feet tall. It definitely gets to him a little bit, but he makes up for it in physical prowess. I mean, again, look at his stats. He was also named the current arm wrestling champion of Aoba Josai. And take a look at this poster. He's a very reliable guy. He's able to handle Oikawa's showiness, and he often acts as a big brother figure to most of his team.
写真いった監督にもぶたれたことないのにごめん写真はまた今度ね
If not, the executioner when they're misbehaving, namely Oikawa. When it comes to Iwaizumi, I think he's a great example of what makes Haikyu so interesting.
てめえの出来がイコールチームの出来だなんて思い上がってるならぶん殴るぞ
もう殴ってるよ
1対1で牛若に勝てるやつなんかうちにはいねえよけどバレーはコートに6人だべや
In a lot of sports anime, there's a tendency to vilify the opposite team. And of course, I've been hyping up other characters along the way, but Aoba Josai is one of the main hurdles that Karasuno struggles to overcome, considering that we see 3 different games with them. All 3 games have different situations, and all lead to a variety of results. Back to my point, Iwa is a beloved character, and I say this about most of them, but him included. It's easy to fall for all these characters throughout the series. I think a big point of this series is to understand that they're not facing some evil enemy, but another set of players who are ambitious and hungry for a win. Iwaizumi is an athletic trainer for the Japanese national team. Like I've said before, for others, he knows his limit, but his passion for the sport is what motivated him to go along this path. He's a powerhouse and a support role for the team, for his team in school, and now he's a support for his team in the big leagues. Plus, the idea of him joining an American fraternity would be a fun concept to run with.
目の前の相手さえ見えてないやつがその先にいる相手を倒せるもんかよ
We've finally made it to our infamous villain, so terrifying, this menace of a man. I think Oikawa is an incredible character.
やっほートビオちゃん久しぶり
And so does the country of Argentina. Once they found out that he had joined their team in the fictional universe, they said screw it, he's on the team for real. Aside from that, Oikawa is a great example of, for lack of a better phrase, an inferiority complex.
来るなこっちに来るな
He's constantly compared to characters like Kageyama and Ushijima, who are naturally talented. Oikawa is also a powerhouse, but he hates the idea of people surpassing him, which is why he behaves the way he does towards Kageyama.
おいくれぐれも夜更かしなんかすんじゃねえぞ
岩ちゃんは俺のお母ちゃんですかごめんしないコンディションは万全でいく
We truly see how hard he works when he's taking footage from previous games and practically staying up all night to watch. But even our hard worker values a day of rest, which is on Mondays. He's incredibly ambitious and nasty. He uses his players really well and does his best to bring out the best in them.
この及川さんが神業速攻なんか使わなくても金田一はちゃんとすごいんだぞと証明してあげよう安心して飛べはい
He greatly inspired Kageyama, though in turn he feels incredibly jealous of Kageyama's natural growth and progression. Though he's mostly level-headed, the two mentioned before tend to bring out his childish side.
今回もどいてもらうぜトビオ思い知ったか
こいつこれで降参か
One of the many jokes people have talked about is that Oikawa wanted to beat everyone so badly in volleyball he fled the country just to do so. Aside from that, Oikawa is a great inspiration for Hinata. I think everyone's reaction to the Brazil arc was literally like mine and in awe. The introduction of Oikawa in this section was something that personally had me screaming. As I write this script, I'm still pretty emotional about it. When Hinata decided to go to to Brazil on his own. He was really lonely in his early days there. But guess who shows up to greet him? None other than the great king himself. This fated reunion was a very enjoyable and fun arc in the story. Oikawa brings Hinata out of his slump, and they even learn a few things from each other. Plus, Setter's getting mad at natural phenomenon never gets old. Although he's labeled as an antagonist, I think he's actually a fan favorite. He consistently ranks 5th in the character polls, but my point is that there are no true antagonists in the series. A lot of people I know were rooting for Aobajosai to win against Karasuno in the preliminary match, which is so funny to me. If they did win, where would the story go? The ability to write well-liked characters, even on the opposing side, is a skill that Furudate has honed incredibly well. He brought Oikawa back when he was needed most. I mean that mostly joking, but his appearance in the final chapter on the opposite team was incredibly exciting. Also, if you're wondering why he went to Argentina, it's because he and Iwa attended a Japan versus Argentina game and were inspired by an Argentinian player named Jose Blanco, who was able to get their ace player back on his game after struggling during the match. A driving force behind Oikawa's character is to be the best possible setter for his players, which is why he ended up leaving Japan so he could get some new experience and change his outlook on life. Back to the Brazil arc, as much as Oikawa helped Hinata out of his slump, Hinata in turn helped Oikawa fall in love with volleyball again, with rediscovering the joy that comes with learning and trying and failing and succeeding in a new thing. I could probably go on about him forever, but I'll stop because you get the point. He's really well written, and he brings joy and a little fear when you're opposite him wherever he goes.
俺は自分の選択が間違いだと思ったことはないし、俺のバレーは何一つ終わっていない。取るに足らないこのプライド、絶対に覚えておけよ。
先輩の晴れ舞台に泥塗ったら絶対に許さねえからな。
One of the most exhilarating matches, I say as if they aren't all intense and exciting, but this particular game was definitely a reminder of how intense things can be. Before I talk about our powerhouse ace, Ushiwaka, I'm going to talk about Tendo. A lot of the team deserves a spotlight, but Tendo is a very interesting character to me because he's a good mix of terrifying to really silly. He's labeled as the guess monster because he's good at reading people and their attack patterns.
ミラクルボーイ
He uses that to his advantage to shut down people's morale and make them in turn second guess themselves in what they should do or try. He really does a number on Hinata and Kageyama's quickset when he's able to shut it down. But with astuteness aside, he does get it wrong on occasion, and he's not perfect.
さっきの間違えたはスルーの方向かな。
最低です。
語尾が変だぞ。
This is something I admire because in reference to KNB, which is more of a shonen anime featuring basketball rather than a sports anime about basketball, the opposing characters don't have a special magic power that they can use infinitely. Personality-wise, he enjoys teasing both his teammates and opponents alike, but he's incredibly aware of how others feel about him. On and off the court, he's a completely different person. He's very friendly to his teammates and juniors and even teases Hinata when he learns he wasn't invited to the training camp.
俺選抜メンバーじゃないので。
あ？じゃあなんでいんの？
押しかけました。
He's also seen watching most of the Karasuno games during nationals. He's also a best friend to Ushijima, who, when not on the court, is in a class of his own. He's another character that in a different story would be more like a villain, but when it comes down to it, he's really just a threatening opponent. He gave up on volleyball after graduation to become a chocolatier in Paris of all things, showing that he's even more of an enigma, but he does reassure Ushijima that he'll be supporting him from the stands. I'd like to quickly touch on Goshiki and Shirabu. These two have a really funny dynamic of senpai and kohai.
ナイスレシブ。いや、ちゃんと返せなかった。
いちいち張り合って疲れないのお前。
Shirabu is always on Goshiki for his arrogance. We see a little bit of Goshiki's past, noting that he was the best in his middle school, now is at the bottom of the pyramid due to becoming a smaller fish. It's interesting how Shirabu checks him all the time.
ボスという点で
今お前はカラスノの10番に確実に一歩出遅れたわけだ。
Though it's mostly done in comedic moments. To be someone my English teachers would be proud of, he's actually got a point. Being arrogant over something just because you're good at it doesn't help you in the long run. Shirabu even praises Hinata, telling Goshiki he underestimates him and doesn't see his value, which does eventually click. If we don't let ourselves learn, we can't get any better. He's saying it, but in an angry way. Plus, Hinata and Goshiki do have a good friendship eventually. Now onto our main event, our powerhouse / human canon Ushijima, another person who is completely different on and off the court.
今週のジャンプ返して。
今まだ無駄毛すっきりすべすべ美肌のところを読んでいる。
広告より先に漫画読んでよ。
Listen, I know the word himbo is tossed around a lot, but Ushi is not a himbo. He's big and beefy and lacks social awareness, but he's not nice enough to be a himbo, unfortunately. Ushijima is the ultimate enemy for Hinata and Kageyama because despite their strength that we see, Ushi does seem to look down on these two for being from a no-name school with no potential. It's the same for his relationship with Oikawa. He doesn't understand why someone so strong wouldn't choose to go to the strongest possible school. He doesn't like those who were confident for no reason. But at the end of the day, when Hinata did beat him, he accepts it gracefully. Hinata shows him that strength isn't always what you think it is. Also, this particular feature about him, his left-handedness, helps him dominate the court with his spikes being harder for people to counter. It's also interesting that as a child, his mom tried to correct that feature, but luckily his dad stepped in. His relationship with his father is also interesting. He was also a volleyball player who looked up to an ace that gave the team a strong sense of security and strength. He wanted to be like that ace his father described, and I definitely say he lived up to it. He's also part of Furudate's grand marketing scheme of making handsome volleyball players so more people pay attention to the sport. Through Tendo's word, people won't pay attention to regular players just trying hard. Becoming even better will bring more attention to the sport as a whole. Last thing, the world is small. The detail of him meeting Iwa in California, who just so happens to be on the way to meet Ushi's father, makes it come full circle.
お前たちには高校最後の大会か。検討をよ。
ほんと腹立つ。全国行くんだから最後じゃねえんだよ。
全国へ行ける代表枠は一つだが。
やって言ってんじゃねえのが余計腹立つ。
They're all part of the same club of weirdos and freaks who just want to be around volleyball.
お前たちの実力がどうあっても、見られることで俺たちが弱くなることはない。
Of all the characters who you can truly say may be the closest to being a villain, it's Coach Washijo.
見りゃいなら女とやれや！
But we still don't have villains here. He has his reasons for everything. Whether they're right or wrong is up for debate, of course. He's an intense, hot-headed coach who on the surface seems to only care about a strong team with players with strong abilities.
点が取れるなら何の文句もねえよ。
Regardless of background or personality. He blatantly looks down on Hinata because he lacks both height and skill, and was, in his words, worthless without Kageyama.
先に言っておく。影山というセッターもいないお前に、俺は価値を感じない。
We definitely see this during the training camp he crashed, where he refuses to let Hinata participate. However, we do see a huge turning point in his beliefs when he watches Hinata and Karasuno fight tooth and nail through the Kamo Madai match. We see him visibly realize that he was wrong about who can be strong, and even watch him physically react to some of their success points in the game. That goes for both of the two little giants. He realizes just because he wasn't allowed to play doesn't mean others aren't going to come forward and break those thoughts and ideologies down and stomp on them. He realizes he was just jealous of tall people and wanted to create a team that had stereotypical powerful players. He's also one of the reasons Hinata was able to go to Brazil in the first place. He connected Hinata to a former student that transferred to beach volleyball in Rio. He gave Hinata a 2-year time limit and sent him off. He then confesses that he sees Hinata's self-worth and determination and would not allow anyone to have higher expectations of Hinata than himself. Kita not being a starting player despite being the captain is a deliberate and interesting choice. Though he may not be their strongest player, he's steadfast and reliable. He's someone who sticks to a routine because it feels good. He has proper manners, amazing grades, very hygienic, the works. Because to him, repetition, perseverance, and diligence just feels good. That's precisely why he was made captain in the first place. The coach saw his hard work and persistence and gave him a chance. Despite him not ever having the chance to play prior, he was made captain. He was always the first one there and the last to leave type of person.
なんかする意味がわからん。
お前機械かなんかな？うすうす気づいとったけど。
いつも以上の力を発揮しようとするから緊張するんやろ。だって飯食ったりクソしたり毎日のことには緊張なんてせんやんか。
He's also incredibly caring towards his teammates regardless of his strict and blunt nature. We see that when Atsumu was forced to rest after getting sick, and Kita had fashioned together a care package for him. A big part of Kita is that he denies his school motto, which is "We don't need memories." He believes the road traveled is just as important as the road that moves forward. That's the main thing I wanted to bring up, which is the overarching theme to this story.
俺を構築するのは毎日の行動であって、結果は副産物に過ぎん。将来バレーボールで飯食ってくわけでもないしな、俺は。でもこれも結果のうちかな。
Stop and slow down for a minute to enjoy where you're at and what you've improved on. Someone might be watching and will help you go even farther. Kita lives a simple life following high school as a rice farmer. He's also providing for Osamu's restaurant, but we'll cover him in a bit.
今までちゃんとやってきたし、後悔なんかないって言い切れる。俺にとって結果は単なる副産物なのも変わらんのに。
Moving on to Aran, he's been stuck with the twins his whole life. A picture-perfect example of patience in the flesh. I love him and don't actually have much to say aside from the fact that he's a great character all around.
お前がいらんこと言うからや。あた。
He's an intense one to face off against because he's one of the top 5 aces in Japan as a whole, and he definitely gives Karasuno a hard time. He's very observant of his surroundings and teammates too. He points out to the audience that one of the biggest strengths of Atsumu is his twin brother.
飛ばしすぎや！多分アツムの一番恵まれとる点は体格よりいろんな能力よりオサムなんやと思う。
He also helps Kita get out of his slump when he was feeling down about his position. He reassures him and tells them that you don't need a reason to feel what you're feeling. He's a very level-headed character, and he does go pro and join a Division 1 team. He's also on the Japanese Olympic national team. I am sad he wasn't featured in this full spread. He definitely deserved to be there. He's just another example of how much heart was put into all these people, no matter what side of the net they're on.
細かいことはええねん。感情に理由なんかいらん。嬉しいは嬉しいんでええんや。
Moving on to our team troublemaker twins. We'll start with Osamu. I actually love him a lot. I feel like he's not talked about nearly enough, but he's a great counterpart to Atsumu. I've also read, but now I can't verify that Furudate created Osamu because he felt that Atsumu seemed lonely, hence why we only knew about him when the match first started. I could be wrong. I think I saw something about it during someone translating an interview. Someone fact check me.
お前試合になると精神年齢5歳下がんのなんなんでやかましいわ
Osamu was always a little ahead of Atsumu growing up. Not necessarily in volleyball, but social skills, making friends, being chosen to play certain positions. But that changed when they got older. He started to be outmatched. He started to fall behind, not hugely, but the dream of going pro together definitely started to fade for him.
あのセッティングでスパイク決められんポンコツは
I'm not a twin, but I do know a lot of twins are often raised to be similar. And I love that they do share similarities but are vastly different people. Furudate really captured that difference when he let Osamu go free from playing volleyball, where he silently admitted that he thinks Atsumu loves volleyball just a little bit more than himself. It took some convincing, but Atsumu was eventually able to accept Osamu's dream, which wasn't the same as his. And the opening of Onigiri Miya is pretty iconic. I refuse to believe that Osamu isn't at every home game the Jackals are playing. Again, this goes back to expectations. Sometimes they aren't meant to be met. You've probably noticed a pattern here, but we'll keep going. Truly an underrated character.
腹減ってる時になんか一口食うとなもっと腹減ってくんねん
and the star of Inarizaki. Just kidding. That's what he wants you to think. He's a great opponent to Karasuno. There's a trend of setters who like to ruin Hinata's day, isn't there? But somehow they also help him grow too, and they're also his biggest fans and best friends. Atsumu is one of the biggest obstacles we see against Karasuno. With his incredibly hard serves that take Noya and the others a while to get adjusted to, we can also see that he's very similar to Oikawa, where he's very good at bringing out the best in his spikers.
セッターはセットするんが仕事やで。適切な位置にボールをセッティングするんや。
We can also see that the two of them have a rivalry. Atsumu's whole life is dedicated to volleyball. That's all he wants to do. That's all he wants to play. Once being beaten by Hinata, he declares that someday he'll set for him.
翔陽君。
はい。どっちだ？
俺はいつかあんたにトスをあげるで。
And it's funny that it actually does come true. Atsumu wants to play the game as long as he can, and he'll always be on the lookout for strength that can help him do so. He's blunt and arrogant, but his heart's in the right place. You can tell he's really passionate about what he does, and that's why he struggled to make friends as a child, because people weren't living up to his expectations. That's why Osamu definitely helped make him feel a little more human, so that he didn't completely go overboard in intensity.
ウイ入れやるか？やる。
He's always had someone to compete with without ruining the relationships of the few friends he's made. Of course, in adulthood, he gets a little bit better. Regardless of Osamu quitting volleyball, the twins still support each other in every way. You can see Osamu sporting his twins' number during the Olympics. The two were a huge threat to Hinata back in the day, but I'd like to imagine they all get together and just eat dinner at Onigiri Miya on off days. He's a great example of a passionate person who just wants to do what they love.
俺のセットで打てへんやつはただのポンコツや。
Quick shout out to Suna for first being voiced by Nobunaga Shimazaki.
ペットに赤ちゃん言葉で話しかけてる現場とかを抑えたい。
Second, for having weird ass posture when spiking. And third, always being there to capture the Mia's worst moments. And fourth, time skip Suna, look at them. Sakusa and Karasuno never actually play. The brief time we do see him during high school is during the training camp arc. But he's also known as one of the top 3 aces. One of the things I want to drive home about him is that there's this misconception that he's a huge germaphobe. And yes, it's a little bit true. He wears a mask and avoids contact with people. But if he was a true germaphobe, he wouldn't be playing volleyball, which is a sport covered in sweat. I'd like to say he's more so just desperate to keep playing. He takes care of his health very meticulously. He points out Hinata's fever when they're stretching because he wants to be doing this for as long as he can. Komori also talks about how Sakusa is pretty obsessive when it comes to getting something done. He's never really passionate about anything, but once he starts something, he can't stop because leaving things unfinished bothers him. He won't quit until he's satisfied with the results. Plus, I will not elaborate, but I am obsessed with him in the time skip. I already said my favorite character is Kuro, so you can probably guess why I also love Sakusa and Matsune. He does have a really interesting relationship with Ushijima.
俺まだビデオ見れてないんだけど、白鳥沢はなんで負けたの？若年君は不調だったわけ？
He admires Ushijima because he's similar to himself. I think he has a lot more appearances in Haikyu, but I haven't read a lot of it, so don't quote me on that. But we do know that he's very good looking and loves volleyball a lot. Plus, he makes life pretty difficult for people playing against him. Quickly want to touch on our weird eyebrow guy. He and Sakusa are cousins, but we saw both of them at Kageyama's special training camp. Komori is the special tall libero, the tallest in the series actually. I'm sure Noya and Yaku are really pleased about that. But he's overall just a friendly guy who wants to play volleyball. I'd say he's someone who also makes Sakusa more palatable because that man can be nasty.
悪いね。こいつ超絶ネガティブなのよ。自分を脅かしそうなやつが気になって仕方ねえの。
Overall, I wanted to point him out because Furudate truly does care about all of the characters in this series. Komori may not have a huge role, but he's not just a throwaway character. I also want to touch on our other top 5 ace, top 3 in fact, who Karasuno doesn't actually ever interact with. If we pretend that Fukuro Dani is the main character in the series for a second, he's the ultimate enemy for them, because he sees Bokuto as his greatest rival. We didn't really get to see it too much in the anime, unfortunately, but Kiryu has an over-analytical personality, overthinking things like why Bokuto said hi to him before their game. Despite being forgotten by the fandom, he has a lot of character depth. Being top 3 in the nation, he's still very doubtful and not confident about his own skills. He struggles with feeling like he's not a dependable ace, similar to Asahi, and he possesses a strong sense of responsibility to his teammates that pushes him to overcome the pressures of the game. As I said before with Komori, look at how much thought is put into him. We don't see him a lot, but what a relatable character. But at the end of the day, he's still a great player. That's why he's top 3 in the nation. Someone who's on par with both Oikawa and Atsumu in terms of villain-like qualities is Hirugami. Again, he's not actually a villain, but he is incredibly cunning, tactical, and scary to play against. Aside from Hoshiumi, he's a driving factor for how difficult the Kamo Madai match was. He especially works his powers for evil against players like Asahi, who are heavily relied on as the ace. Before we talk about his playing style, I really want to talk about the fact that Hirugami quit the sport after high school. A lot of characters did, but his is a very special case to me. In the present, his brother is on the Adlers, and when he was younger, he was expected to play too. He always trained really hard and had the mindset that he was going to be the best player and go pro. But once he started middle school, he hit a wall. He started to make mistakes and kept blaming himself and convinced himself that he needed to overcome that and work harder because mistakes were for weak people. For a while that mindset worked, but of course he would hit a wall again. He eventually came to the conclusion that he actually hated volleyball. That is until Hoshiumi came along and told him that if he hates it, he should just quit. He tells him no one is forcing him to play, but he thinks he might just be burnt out. That's when a light bulb goes off and he realizes that was the case. It was a turning point for him, when he realized he just needed to be okay with letting things go. Back to his playstyle, he's often dubbed as the immovable Hirugami, which he doesn't like because it makes him seem like someone who doesn't move at all. But in reality, for opponents, he's someone who's impossible to spike around. He's strong and resistant, a truly formidable opponent. What's interesting about this game is specifically how both Hirugami and Hoshiumi were made to counter Karasuno in a lot of ways, and it works. A highly defensive team against a highly offensive team. The only difference is that one member who's like Hinata outmatches him in every way. Hoshiumi is the infamous true little giant of this generation.
ああ、これだ。星海高麗169センチ。レフトレフト。
I like to say that Hoshiumi is like Hinata if Hinata were able to properly play in middle school. If Hinata had the technical skills Hoshiumi was given, they'd be on the same level during this game. Not only is Hoshiumi a great spiker, much like Hinata, but he can receive, serve, and set really well too. Something that during their match against Karasuno you can see Hinata severely lacks in comparison. Hoshiumi grew up with a really tall brother, and he initially wanted to play basketball. He chose volleyball, and it meant he'd stop being bothered by his older brother. He was met with a lot of hardship due to his size, but one day it all clicked when he and his mom were talking. She told him that there isn't a way to make yourself taller, but there are lots of ways to make yourself better. So start working now, and then you've got a better shot at beating him at being better. Essentially, she was saying that even though there's a general expectation in things like this, that height and size makes a difference, as long as you have the skill set, there's no limit that you can't surpass. Hoshiumi is someone who's already accepted his height won't change drastically. So what can he do? Work on everything else humanly possible and be the best there is. I mean, take a look at his near-perfect stats. He's someone Hinata took inspiration from, for sure. When they reunite and play again in adulthood, it's an incredible game. Their rivalry is great because Hoshiumi also acknowledges that they're not the same type of strong, and there's different ways that they can fight.
じゃあもっとビビれよ驚けよ初見からずっとみたいな顔しやがって大抵のやつはこのタッパの俺を舐めた後 俺のプレーを見てビビる。そこまでが一連の流れなんだよ。
Don't give up because you don't think you have the right stuff. Hone what you have and learn new things so you can get over the hurdle in your own way. Also, him being the most normal on the Adlers is the funniest thing in the world to me.
小さいことはバレーボールに不利な要因であっても不能の要因ではない。
I want to briefly bring up Pedro because he's Hinata's roommate in Brazil. At first, they had a hard time communicating until Hinata was able to close the gap by bonding over One Piece together. After that conversation, Hinata realized that he's very similar to Kenma. Plus, it didn't hurt that Pedro was a huge fan of Kenma, so they could bond over that too. Pedro remains a friend to Hinata, and I definitely believe that when Hinata went back to Brazil, they kept in touch. And shout out to Heitor. Furudate threw in a really sweet couple. Plus, it's really cool how she's the one who proposes to him. Just wanted to mention them because they're part of Hinata's Brazil life and I love them. Heitor is Hinata's teammate and the reason he becomes so well known as Ninja Shoujo too. Bokuto, Atsumu, and Sakusa being Hinata's teammates was such an iconic moment. I remember someone theorized that the three of them, maybe not so much Sakusa, but the others were people who wanted to play with Hinata, while the Adlers consisted of people who wanted to beat him. This section is largely me fangirling and not actual character analysis. I honestly think this arc is one of the best. This is the most interesting culmination of characters and a great way to pop everyone back into the world. It was fun to see the team makeups too. Let's get to the character who inspired the whole story to begin with, Tenma. The original Little Giant makes his debut in the Kamo Madai match. Coincidentally, Tenma, as we find out, retired from volleyball after high school, and Hinata says something we would have never thought. Surprisingly, I'm not disappointed. What a full circle. This is someone who literally inspired Hinata to start playing, and Hinata is okay with what Tenma chose to do in his life. And not only that, he's on the same stage as he saw Tenma on all those years ago. Tenma is a great character. He's probably a little bit of a Furudate self-insert, since he's a manga artist who eventually is going to be writing a story about some volleyball players, but he's still very analytical while he watches the game. He even admits that Hoshiumi at his current state is definitely stronger than he ever was. Before he was good though, he often struggled getting blocked a lot. His abilities started to grow, and eventually he created his own playstyle when he started to hit the ball between the blocker's arms and use it against them. That little moment inspired Hinata, and you know the rest. Even when Hinata had to be subbed out due to his fever, Tenma was certain that not all was lost, rather that he thinks that he'll be even more ready to go next time. He was also proud of the fact that he created a monster.
自分がエースであることの絶対的プライドと自信、そういうのが全身から立ち上ってんだ。
Now on to our king of the court, Kageyama. Fun fact, did you know that we don't see really any of Kageyama's backstory until the final arc?
秋山賞出身影山飛雄です。バレーは小2からです。
We see bits and pieces of him in middle school and of course his attitude problem and his issues with Oikawa, but not truly Kageyama. Starting from probably literal birth, we find out that this round little baby has been obsessed with volleyball his entire life thanks to his grandpa. His sister Miwa, who's a couple years older than him, used to play when they were kids, and that let Kageyama join in. Kageyama has a strong attachment to volleyball, as it's also something that brought him closer to his grandpa. He was able to play with him all that time until one day he got really sick and Kageyama realized he was all alone, very similar to Bokuto. This happened right before he entered middle school, which is largely the reason his personality warped. But Kageyama was never good with his emotions, and he was even worse at communicating his feelings.
Nice.
そこは噛むなよ、影山。
All he knew is that he wanted to play no matter what. The sweet little boy was gone, and a selfish king personality was formed because people weren't living up to his expectations. Kageyama was waiting for one person to come along to fulfill what his grandpa had told him, and that person was Hinata. We go back to this one simple thing. Kageyama is only selfish because he wants to play so badly. Now, as we dive into his relationship with Hinata, Kageyama has been pushed and trained in the strictest manner. and he sees Hinata, someone flitting around with his head cut off, as someone who's weak and has no potential.
お前エースになるなんて言うからにはちゃんと上手くなってんだろうな。ちんたらしてたらまた3年間棒に振るぞ。
That is, until he's forced to work with him. The two clash because of their abilities. Kageyama, with his volleyball journal and highly analytical mind, clocks what Hinata is truly meant to do in like a few games flat. But again, we go back to his communication skills, which are really bad. As early as Volume 1, Kageyama is already talking about Hinata being the greatest decoy.
いいか、ひなた。お前は最強のおとりだ。
おお、最強のおとり。なんかパッとしねえ。
It's just a matter of the groundwork first. We watch as Kageyama learns to trust his teammates more and more and realizes that he was holding himself back. At first he does overcorrect, but then he realizes that he has to be a little selfish too to push them further.
どんなにいい子ぶろうとしてもお前の本質は王様なのだ。新コート上の王様誕生だ。
This you can see when he forces Tsukkishima to go higher and higher. Kageyama's eventual realization that he can be just as selfish on a team is what starts him on a whole new journey of growth. Look at him going to the Olympics at just 19 years old. We see Kageyama go from
レシーブもスパイクもトスも全部俺一人でやれればいいのにって思ってる。
何言ってんのお前。
to I wanted to take this team further. We see him accomplish so many things after he opens his mind and learns to work as a team. And we can see the joy he has even after losing to Hinata in the Adler's game. You can see how proud he is of one of his best friends for crushing him rather than being upset that he lost. He needed Hinata as much as Hinata needed him. As much as I could probably write more, I think that's enough. You get the picture. He's more than just an angry, selfish player. In fact, that's not what he is at all. He's a carefully crafted, intentional person who just lives and breathes for one thing: volleyball.
ここで終わんのか。ここで負けるのか。違う。俺は全国へ行く。もっと早く動け。もっと高く飛べ。俺のトスに合わせろ。勝ちたいなら。あの日コンビミスは何度かあった。でも最後のあれはミスじゃない。あれは拒絶だ。もうお前にはついていかないとあいつらが俺に言った一球だった。影山、お前はエースじゃないけどそのスピードとバネと俺のトスがあればどんなブロックとだって勝負できる。
勝ちって
俺はもう謝んねえ。謝んなきゃいけないようなトスはあげねえ。俺が何かに絶望するとしたらバレエができなくなった時だけだ。
大丈夫。お前は緊張とかしねえの？
します。今はしてません。
なんだよ。
ここは通過点っすから。お前にこれを言う日が来ると。ナイスレシーブ。
Okay, buckle up. Hinata Shoujo is a master class in character development. I know that some people think Hinata is super obnoxious at first, but that's the way you're meant to fall for him anyway. We see this young Shoujo full of energy and we watch him lose.
最初で最後の公式戦。翔ちゃん、並ぼう。獲得セット数0。総試合時間わずか31分。
Really lose badly against Kageyama.
お前がコートに君臨する王様ならそいつを倒して
That starts his new goal, which is to crush him, only to realize that he's stuck with him now for high school. The two are like night and day, and I mean literally. Have you seen their hair color schemes? But aside from being a mega loser, the one thing in the beginning Hinata does have is the ability to jump, and Kageyama is quick to realize that they have a special weapon in between the two of them, and that sets them off on their mirrored journey. Meanwhile, Kageyama has the skills but none of the means to communicate what he needs or wants. And with all progress, you're bound to hit a wall at some point. And that's what happens to the pair of them when they lose to Alba Jose. During the training camp, they eventually realize they need to part ways because Kageyama is adamant that Hinata doesn't need to evolve anymore and that the quick is the best weapon. This eventually leads to them getting actually physically violent with each other because they can't agree on what needs to be done. That will eventually lead to Hinata coming under Ukai Sr.'s wing to train and learn about the basics. I don't really need to go over this again, it'll be repetitive, but I will add that Ukai emphasizes to him that he needs to learn how to fight at the top or he'll be left behind. And now it's off to the races. Hinata does as much as he can to get ready and train with different people, and he crashes the 3rd gym squad while he's at it too.
戦い方は見えてくる。
Then we make it to the long-awaited spring qualifiers round. These are all about showing off what Hinata has learned, and all while that happens, he rapidly grows even more during each of these games. Like I mentioned before, if Hinata had proper training, he would have likely been like Hoshiumi. As he evolves, we also see how his teammates evolve because of him.
止められなくても触れ。持ってこい。
He's a bundle of joy who motivates them and pushes them forward with his excitement and passion for the game, even if it's a miss or something scary. Through nationals, we watch Hinata evolve even more.
小さな巨人が戦った舞台。お前の言う小さな巨人の頃の会場はこっちじゃなくて代々木の方だろ。はい、黙って。雰囲気が大事なんだから。
We finally see how his brain works, and even though it was just a receive, it was so much more than that. Hinata had finally leveled up from acting on instinct to actively thinking about his next move. Following the win against Nekoma and the inevitable loss against Kamo Madai, we learn that this is just the start of their story all along. As I write this, I can still remember the feeling I had when turning the page to see a few years later, Ryo. What the hell was he doing there? Ninja Shoyo, a household name. An incredibly rich arc, we see Hinata make a huge decision to switch from indoor volleyball to beach volleyball so that he can hone his skills even further. That's where Coach Washijo comes to help. Here is really where Hinata gets most of his growth. We know that his 2nd and 3rd years of high school he trained really hard, but I think this is where he fully realized himself as a player. Plus, he and Oikawa reunite and get to play together. His receiving, his setting ability, and of course his jumping and stamina improved tenfold because of the sand. We watch him eat, sleep, work, and train over and over, and then we get to see the tail end of his Brazil journey in his final match. Amazingly enough, he loses. But not all is lost, because he's pulled so much from that experience anyway. Plus, he still gets to attend Heitor's wedding before he leaves. Then we finally see him back in Japan, the final arc between the Adlers and the Jackals. We watch Hinata show off everything he's learned, and it's like watching your kid learn how to walk. I guess, literally, I don't even think I can use words to describe the feeling, and that's the whole purpose of this video. A few key moments I love are when he uses his legs to keep the ball in the air, and of course, his phenomenal jump serve. All of this work goes into a well-earned win. And amazingly enough, no one is even upset at the outcome. Later on, we finally get to see what we've been hoping for all this time. Hinata and Kageyama, after 1,096 wins and 1,100 losses on his part, the two are back on the same side for the Olympics. Hinata as a character represents perseverance and the unwavering drive to push forward towards a goal.
それとタンパク質、今はコンビニでも買えるプロテインがあると同時に必要なのが糖質、バナナや 100% オレンジジュースなんかだな。で、
家に帰ってちゃんとした飯を食う。
He's been through a lot of loss, and he obviously still continues to lose, but for him that's part of the journey. He's worked his way up from the concrete to join the world stage.
正常が痩せた土地なら、俺たちはコンクリートか何かですかね。
こいつ。
コンクリート出身、日向翔陽です。あなたをぶっ倒して全国へ行きます。
And he deserves every shining medal he earns. He's an incredibly positive person who draws in everyone around who meets him. No wonder all of the setters from all of the schools were befriending him. Not only that, everyone he meets along the journey was quick to bask in his light. He's a protagonist whose determination was what moved him forward and told us that it's okay to fall sometimes. I've cried with him, I've laughed with him, and I've cheered him on.
0.1秒が勝負の瞬間にこいつらだけがこのタイミングの双子の速いバックアタックに。
And I think he's truly one of the best protagonists of all time.
目の前に立ちはだかる高い高い壁、その向こうはどんな眺めだろうか、どんな風に見えるのだろうか。頂の景色、俺一人では決して見ることのできない景色。でも一人ではないのなら
お願いします。
ごめん。
At this point, I've covered a lot of characters, and there are hundreds more. I love them all, but I don't want this video to be 1,000 years long, so I'm sorry that I can't cover every single detail of every single moment, but you get the idea of how many characters make this story incredible. And if you want more context, then read it yourself. After I basically told you the whole story through a discombobulated mess of the characters themselves, I'll try to be quicker in this section. I think this story has a wonderful start to finish. It's only 402 chapters, which seems like a lot, but when you think about a big book series or, I don't know, One Piece, it's less than half of that. The one criticism I have, and it's literally not at all criticism, but I wish we would have gotten some filler arc just because I want to see more of the things like the training camp. But I do know Furudate didn't include those because they were afraid people would get bored, but I can absolutely assure you that would not happen. Something I also admire about the story was that Furudate did not include an injury as an obstacle for anyone. It's not that people don't have life-changing injuries, but it just wasn't needed as a plot device in this. There was already enough struggle fighting for the top anyway. We watch Hinata grow, but we also watch all 3 billion other characters in his journey and how they impact his life and how he impacts theirs.
思わないかもしれない。ただのパス。俺、コートに立ちたいです。やっべえ。
Some odd discourse I do see is that people preferring other teams to win over him, and that's totally fine, but we do have to remember that he is ultimately the protagonist of this story.
負けは弱さの証明ですか？君たちにとって負けは試練なんじゃないですか？地に這いつくばった後、また立って歩けるのかという。君たちがそこに這いつくばったままならば、それこそが弱さの証明です。
I love this story a lot because it's not just about a team climbing to the top, but about the journey it took to get there. And yes, there's a ton of life lessons and character depth, but you also have great action sequences with incredible plays and intense moments that have you on the edge of your seat. There's great friendships and relationships we see with the characters that have been fleshed out so well. They're practically people you know yourself. Even if you've seen it or read it before, you still get sucked into it with every moment you watch. Each game that they had against specific people, against specific teams, was meant to level them up in a different way. The characters stick with you in the little things or everyday parts of your life because they are so lifelike.
野安さんの身長が縮んだ
確かにおめえは髪の分まで身長だぜ。
笑ってんじゃねえ。
あんまり騒ぐな。大地には怒ら。
俺だよ、朝日だよ。お前らうるさい。
Everyone's had dreams die. Everyone's had dreams come true. Everyone's worked hard at the things they love. Not only that, but we get a great conclusion to his journey, an ambiguous ending. Although we do know he's still playing volleyball. From start to finish, Furudate's only goal was to get more people interested in this little sport called volleyball.
会場中に見せてあげましょう。
If you've noticed, after each character, I added a different quote that they said at some point or something related to them. All of these things can be applied to real life, regardless of this being a fictional story. Haikyu is not written as a story with epic wins and taking the championship. It was written out of a love for volleyball. One of the biggest things I take from it is that it's not about the results, but the journey. When Hinata is in his first year, none of the major teams expected to win nationals wins. The first year group doesn't even win their second or third, but they come pretty damn close. Even though they lost, 3 out of 4 of them still continued with volleyball even after that. We meet a cast of wonderful characters who've all experienced different things in life and who all have one thing in common: volleyball. A lot of these characters are lonely people who found joy and happiness with the sport, and they develop great friendships from it too. But one thing that is true about the sport, and really anything else, is that it connects. Nekoma's banner "Connect" is the overarching lesson. You connect the ball to the next player if you want to keep the game going. The connections they make along the way are what make the experience worthwhile. With the right connections, Hinata was able to travel around the world and improve his skills. He reconnected with Oikawa and felt better after going through loneliness and depression. He's always connected to Kageyama, even if they're across the world from each other. And outside of the story, Haikyu has connected so many people together by bringing them to the sport itself, or creating art or writing stories, or even just participating as a viewer. This was definitely a mess, and I know I missed a lot, and I only scratched the surface of some of their relationships. You could probably get different things out of the story too, and this was definitely not objective, but I truly believe this story is incredibly rich and filled with great characters. If you for some reason haven't read the full thing, please go read. And if you stuck with me until the end just because you were curious about what I had to say for who knows how long this will end up being, thank you so much. I love this story and I want you to too. My way of connecting to you is telling you to go read and watch Haikyu right now.